I remember the exact moment I realized I had won everything and lost everything at the same time. It was a Tuesday, ordinary, no dramatic weather, no cosmic sign, just a Tuesday evening in a quiet apartment that I had spent 3 years earning the right to live in. The floors were a specific kind of hardwood, the kind you point out to people when they visit, the kind that costs more than it should, the kind that becomes a sentence, "This is who I am now." The windows were tall, the view was significant. The refrigerator had the right things in it, the ones you see in lifestyle content, clean containers, labeled sections, filtered water with lemon slices floating in a glass pitcher. I sat down on the couch, and I just sat there, not thinking, not planning, not optimizing, just sitting. And in that sitting, something happened that I was not prepared for. The silence moved, not the room, the silence itself. It shifted, like something had been holding its breath for a very long time and finally exhaled. And in that exhale, the quiet became so loud I could hear myself. Not my thoughts, not my goals, not the voice that narrates your ambitions and writes your 5-year plans. Me, the actual me, the one underneath everything I had built, and what I heard was not triumphant. I had built a career that would make your jaw drop. I want to be honest about that, not to impress you, but because the trap doesn't work unless the cage looks like a palace. I had income streams, plural. I had a morning routine that I could describe with military precision. The hour I woke, the temperature of the water, the length of the meditation, the exact ratio of protein in the first meal. I had a body that reflected discipline. I had a calendar that reflected ambition. I had relationships, or what I called relationships, scheduled in like maintenance appointments, friends on rotation, family calls on Sunday, 40 minutes, enough to say I showed up. I had optimized my life. Every corner of it had been measured, assessed, improved, and measured again. I treated myself like a machine, and I treated the machine well. Maintenance, upgrades, performance reviews, and by every external metric I'd have ever been handed as a child, as a teenager, as a young man trying to figure out what it meant to be good enough, I had arrived. So why was I sitting on that couch, in that apartment, with those floors and that view and that refrigerator full of curated intention, feeling like a ghost in my own life? Wait, before you scroll, I need you to stay with me for a second. Because I know you. I know the particular texture of what you're carrying right now. I know how it feels to be impressive to everyone in the room except the person you are when no one's watching. I know the exhaustion that doesn't show up in blood work. I know what it's like to have built so much and to stand inside the building and to feel nothing but the echo, "You're not broken." That's not what this is. This is something else entirely. Let me go back further. Let me go back to where it started, because transformation without origin is just performance, and I've had enough performance to last several lifetimes. I grew up in a house where love had conditions, not cruel conditions, not dramatic conditions, just quiet, consistent, invisible conditions, the kind that don't announce themselves, the kind that seep into you slowly, the way cold gets into a house not through the doors but through the walls. My father was not a villain. My mother was not absent. They loved me. I believe that completely. But love in that house had a grammar. It had a subject, a verb, and a condition. I love you when you succeed. I love you when you make us proud. I love you when you hold it together. No one ever said it like that. No one needed to. Children don't need things stated explicitly. They learn the atmosphere. They read the room before they can read a book. And I learned very early that the version of me that was worth loving was the version that performed, the version that came home with good news. The version that didn't complain, didn't struggle visibly, didn't ask for too much, didn't take up too much space with his mess. So I became the version that performed, and I became very, very good at it. I built walls. Not the angry kind, that would have been too obvious. I built elegant walls, charming walls. Walls that looked like confidence, like competence, like emotional intelligence. I read enough about psychology to sound like I understood myself. I went to therapy long enough to have the vocabulary. I knew all the words: avoidant attachment, emotional unavailability, fear of intimacy. I could diagnose myself with clinical precision while simultaneously refusing to change a single fundamental thing. Because knowing is not the same as living differently. That's the lie that smart people tell themselves. That comprehension is transformation. That if you understand the mechanism of your cage, you don't have to actually leave it. I understood my cage completely. I lived in it for years. Tell me something, and I want you to be honest. Not with me, with yourself. When someone asks you how you're doing, what do you actually say? You say fine, you say busy, you say grinding or building or in a season. You say something that sounds like an answer but contains nothing real. You've learned to respond to the question without answering it. You've learned to be present in a conversation while withholding the part of you that would make the conversation actually matter. Don't deny it, because I did it too. I did it in every room I entered. I showed up fully costumed as myself and gave people the version that was easy to receive, interesting, accomplished, warm enough, funny enough, together enough. I never gave anyone the weight. Because weight scares people, and scared people leave. and leaving meant I was not worth staying for. And if I was not worth staying for, then the entire performance had been for nothing, so I kept the weight, and I carried it alone, and I called it strength, and then I met her. I'm not going to describe her the way love stories describe women. I'm not going to make her a destination or a rescue or a dream. She was none of those things, and she was better than all of them. She was a person. A full, complicated, specific person who had her own history and her own weight and her own particular way of existing in the world that had nothing to do with fixing me. We met the way people meet when they're not looking, sideways incidentally through a mutual friend at a small dinner where the conversation was already good enough that neither of us needed to impress anyone. She said something early in the evening that I've thought about almost every day since. She wasn't talking to me specifically. She was talking to the table, but something in it landed in me like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward in every direction. She said, I think most people are terrified of being known. They want to be loved, but they manage the information so carefully that what gets loved is never actually them. The table laughed lightly and moved on. I did not move on. I sat with that sentence for the rest of the evening, and on the drive home, and for weeks after. Because she had said casually in a social setting, to no one in particular, the exact thing I had spent 30-some years making sure no one ever found out about me, here's what I learned, or began to learn. Because learning something real is not an event. It's a long, slow, often humiliating process of unlearning the thing you built on top of it. I'd confused being known with being seen. I'd let people see me, my work, my results, my surface presentation, my curated version, and I'd called that intimacy. I had mistaken visibility for vulnerability. And because I had never been fully known, I had never experienced love that didn't feel conditional. Because conditional love is the only love that comes with instructions, and I had followed the instructions so precisely for so long that I no longer knew what I would do without them. The instructions were perform, excel, hold it together, don't show the fractures, never let them see you bleed. And the terrible, beautiful irony is that in following those instructions perfectly, I had made myself unfindable, unreachable, present in body and absent in everything that matters. She asked me once, maybe 3 months in, not as a challenge, but as a genuine question, the kind that comes from real curiosity, not from a need to win something. She asked me, what are you actually afraid of? Not career afraid, not practical afraid, actually afraid. I remember feeling something shift in my chest, a tightening, a familiar alarm system activating, the one that said retreat, deflect, answer the question without answering the question. And I started to do that. I started to give her the polished answer, the self-aware answer, the answer that sounded like honesty but was actually just another layer of armor presented as skin. And she waited. She didn't push. She didn't fill the silence. She just waited with this particular quality of patience that I had never encountered before. Not the patience of someone tolerating a delay, but the patience of someone who already knew there was something worth waiting for. So I stopped. I stopped mid-sentence, and I said something I had never said out loud in my life. I said, I'm afraid that if someone actually knew me, not the version I show, but the actual thing underneath, they would leave. And that would confirm everything I've ever suspected about myself, that the performance is the only part worth loving. The room was very quiet. She didn't say it was going to be okay. She didn't say I was wrong. She didn't fix it, which was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for me, because she was treating me like a man capable of sitting in his own truth instead of a child who needed it taken away. She just said, thank you for saying that. And she stayed. Look at me for a second. Are you waiting for someone to stay? Are you building and achieving and optimizing and performing? Not just for the results, but because somewhere in the back of your architecture you believe that if you build enough, if you become impressive enough, if you make yourself impossible to dismiss, then maybe someone will finally stay long enough to know you. And are you simultaneously making sure they never get close enough to actually try? I know exactly how that works. The push-pull of it, the exhaustion of wanting connection and engineering distance at the same time, the way you can sit across from someone who cares about you and feel more alone than you would sitting by yourself, because at least when you're alone, you're not performing for anyone. That kind of loneliness is its own particular species. It doesn't look like loneliness from the outside. From the outside, it looks like independence. It looks like self-sufficiency. It looks like you have it together, which is the saddest possible misreading of what's actually happening. I started to change, not all at once. I want to be very careful about how I say this, because the mythology of transformation is one of the most dangerous stories we tell. We want it to be a moment, a revelation, a singular before and after, because a moment is dramatic and a moment is shareable and a moment asks nothing of us going forward. Real change is not a moment. Real change is a Tuesday where you choose differently than you chose last Tuesday, and a Wednesday, and a slow accumulation of different choices that, over time, rearranges who you actually are from the inside rather than who you present yourself as from the outside. I started with small things, embarrassingly small things. I started leaving my phone in another room during dinner, not because I'd read an article about it, because I noticed, one evening, that she was saying something real, something that mattered, something from her actual interior life. And I was half present, and I caught myself, and I felt the specific shame of almost missing something irreplaceable in pursuit of something completely forgettable. I started asking questions I actually wanted the answers to. This sounds obvious. It was revolutionary. There's a version of listening that's really just waiting to speak, and I had been doing that version for years. I started listening to understand instead of listening to respond, and the conversations I began having were so different from the ones I'd been having that it felt like I had learned a new language. I started telling the truth in small increments, not confessional truth, not the kind that unloads everything onto someone else as a form of relief. Honest truth. The truth that says I don't actually know when I don't know. The truth that says I'm struggling with this when I'm struggling. The truth that makes you smaller in the moment and larger over time because you're no longer spending energy on the maintenance of a fiction. Here's what I learned about the empire I had built. It was real. I want to be clear about that. The work was real, the results were real, the discipline was real. I'm not dismissing any of it, but I had built an empire when what I needed was a home. And those are not the same architecture. An empire is built for impression. It's built to be seen from a distance. Its scale is the point. Its grandeur is the message. You build an empire to communicate something to the world. I am significant. I am not someone you can dismiss. A home is built for habitation. It's built to be lived in. It's built for comfort and intimacy and the specific kind of mess that comes from actually being present in a space. A home has worn edges and familiar corners and rooms where the light is different at different times of day, and you know which floorboard creaks, and you've stopped trying to fix it because the creak is part of the home now. I had been building empires. I had never learned to build a home. The question she asked me eventually, not confrontationally, not as an ultimatum, just as a genuine wondering out loud, was this: what would you do with yourself if you weren't trying to prove something? I thought she was asking about work. I thought she was asking about ambition, about goals, about the relentless engine of achievement I had been running for so long I'd forgotten it was possible to turn it off. But she wasn't asking about work. She was asking about identity. She was asking, who are you when you subtract the performance? What remains? What do you actually want from the hours of your life that isn't about demonstrating your worth to an audience you've invented in your head, from the composite of every person who ever made you feel you had to earn their approval? I didn't have an answer. That was the most honest thing I'd discovered in years. There's a particular prison that high-functioning people live in, and it's the cruelest kind because it looks exactly like freedom from the outside. You have choices, you have resources, you have options, you can go anywhere, do anything, become whatever next version of successful you decide to aim at. The doors are not locked, you can leave anytime, except you can't because the prison is not external. The prison is the belief system you absorbed before you were old enough to question it. The belief that your value is a function of your output, that love is something you earn through excellence, that rest is the same as failure, that needing things from people is weakness. That asking for help reveals an insufficiency that, if known, would cost you everything. The walls of that prison are not iron. They're expectations. And some of them are so old and so familiar and have been part of your interior architecture for so long that you've started to think they're just you. You've stopped distinguishing between who I am and what I learned to do to survive, but they're not the same. She said yes. To a specific question on a specific evening, in a specific moment that I could describe in granular detail, the temperature, the light, the way she looked at me for a long moment before she answered, the way I felt in the pause between my asking and her answering, which contained what I now understand was the most terrifying vulnerability I had ever voluntarily offered another person. The yes changed things, but not in the way I expected. I expected the yes to feel like arrival, like the destination at the end of a long journey, like the metric being hit, the goal being achieved, the proof that the version I had built of myself was finally enough to be chosen. It didn't feel like that at all. It felt like a door opening into something I didn't have a map for. Here's what I learned. Here's what I'm still learning. Because that's the other thing about real transformation. It doesn't end. It doesn't hand you a certificate and release you. It continues asking of you daily, in the ordinary moments, in the small decisions, in the choice between presence and distraction, between honesty and performance, between building something that impresses and building something that endures. I learned that being known is not the same as being destroyed. I had spent my life treating vulnerability like exposure, like the enemy, like the gap in the armor through which everything good about my life could be taken from me. I believed, in the bone-deep way you believe things you learned before you had words for them, that if someone saw the whole of me, the doubt, the fear, the days I didn't have it together, the years I ran on adrenaline and anxiety and called it discipline, they would determine that the whole of me wasn't worth the trouble. What I discovered is almost absurdly different from that belief. What I discovered is that the parts of me I hid most carefully were the parts she loved most specifically, not despite them, not in a sentimental, romanticized way that required her to perform acceptance. but genuinely, because those were the parts that were actually human. Those were the parts that weren't curated. Those were the places where I stopped performing and started existing, and in that existence, there was something real enough to actually reach. I think about the men I know, the ones I've grown up around, worked alongside, competed with, and compared myself to, and measured myself against in the quiet arithmetic of masculine achievement. And I see the same thing in so many of them. This tremendous aching competence, this ability to build and produce and solve and provide, this capacity for enormous effort in every direction that leads outward, and this profound practiced inability to move inward. Not because they don't feel things, they feel everything. They feel it deeply and constantly, and sometimes with a ferocity that, if it ever found full expression, would make the people around them understand exactly how much is happening beneath the surface. But they don't know what to do with the feeling except turn it into fuel, convert it into action, metabolize emotion into motion, because motion at least produces something visible, something measurable, something that can be pointed to as evidence that the pain was worth something. I was that man. I am still, some days in some rooms, that man. But I am learning, slowly, imperfectly, with consistent regression and occasional humiliation, to sit in the room with myself and not immediately reach for something to optimize. The collapse I was describing, the Tuesday, the couch, the silence that moved. I understand now what that was. That was mercy. That was the moment the version of me that had been running the show for 3 decades finally ran out of road. The engine was still good. The ambition hadn't gone anywhere. But the direction had been pointing outward for so long that I had no interior orientation left. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what I valued. I didn't know who I was without the performance. I didn't know what I would choose if choice were free from the need to demonstrate anything to anyone. The emptiness was not emptiness. The emptiness was an invitation. It was the first moment in years that there was enough silence to hear myself over the noise of everything I had been building. And the first thing I heard in that silence was not ambition. It was not a next goal. It was not a plan. It was a question. The most important question I had ever been asked, posed to me by my own interior in the only quiet I had given it in years. What do you actually want your life to feel like, not look like? Feel like. I started rebuilding, not the empire. The empire didn't need rebuilding. The empire was fine. The empire had its own momentum and its own infrastructure, and it didn't need me to personally attend to every brick. I started rebuilding the foundation. And a foundation is different from everything built on top of it, because a foundation is not seen. No one visits your foundation. No one photographs your foundation. The foundation doesn't appear in the portfolio or the highlight reel or the metric that demonstrates your worth. The foundation is the invisible thing that determines whether any of the visible things hold. My foundation had been poured wrong, not through malice, not through stupidity, through the simple accumulation of early learning that said, your worth is what you produce, your value is your performance, love is a transaction, and you must always ensure the exchange is favorable. That's not a foundation. That's a trap door. So I started with honesty. I started with the practice of saying true things even when the true things were uncomfortable. Not dramatically, not as a form of purging or confessing or making scenes, just quietly, consistently. In the small moments where the old instinct would have been to smooth it over and perform fine, I started saying I don't know and sitting in the not knowing without immediately filling it. I started saying I was wrong without qualifying it into something more defensible. I started saying I need the 2 most terrifying words in the language of a man who has spent his life ensuring he needs nothing from anyone. Tell me something. When was the last time you asked for help? Not delegated, not outsourced, not managed, asked. Genuinely from a place of actual need, without the careful management of the ask to make sure it didn't reveal too much, cost too much dignity, appear too much like weakness. When was the last time you let someone see you not having it together? Don't answer to me. Answer to yourself. In the space between hearing that question and moving past it, there's your answer. She taught me something I couldn't have learned from any book, any program, any system of self-improvement I had ever put myself through. She taught me it through her consistency, not her perfection. She was not perfect, and she did not pretend to be. And there was something enormously relieving about being in the presence of someone who brought their full humanity, including the difficult parts. Not her unconditional agreement. She disagreed with me often, with clarity and without cruelty. And that disagreement was one of the most respectful things anyone had ever offered me, because it meant she was engaging with me as a real person and not managing me like a fragile thing. She taught me through consistency. She was the same person in the difficult moments as in the easy ones. She was the same person when I was impressive as when I was struggling. She was the same person when I had it together as when I fell apart. And I fell apart genuinely for the first time in as long as I could remember, in front of another person, without the cushion of performance between my actual state and someone else's perception of it. I fell apart, and she didn't leave. She was present, just present, not fixing, not solving, not telling me what it meant or what to do next, just there with her hand on my back as if to say, I know, I see you, this is allowed. And something in me that had been braced against the world since I was a child slowly, incrementally began to unclench. Here's what I learned about presence, real presence. Not the performance of being present, which is nodding at the right times and asking follow-up questions and demonstrating through behavior that you are attending, but actual presence. The kind where you're actually in the room. It can't be optimized. It can't be scheduled. It can't be added to the routine like a supplement you take at a specific time for a specific outcome. Presence is the opposite of optimization. Presence requires that you stop trying to improve the moment and simply inhabit it. And for a man who had built an entire identity around improving moments, around looking at any situation and immediately identifying how to make it better, more efficient, more productive, more worthy of the time invested, presence was not a skill. Presence was the abdication of the primary skill I had spent my life developing. Learning it felt like learning to stand still when every instinct was running. The bricks. I keep coming back to the bricks. I built so many bricks, each one precise, intentional, placed with care, achievement after achievement after achievement, stacked in the particular pattern I had decided represented a life well constructed. And the structure was impressive, genuinely impressive. The kind of structure people point to from a distance and use as evidence for what's possible, but I had built it on the altar of approval. And anything built on an altar is not a home, it's an offering. It's something you build and then stand back from and hope that the thing you're offering it to finds it sufficient. I was offering my life to an approval I had learned in childhood and carried into adulthood, and the terrible thing about learned approval is that it never satisfies. You offer the thing, and then you have to offer a bigger thing, and then a bigger thing, and the altar keeps requiring more because the approval was never real in the first place. It was a projection. It was a child's interpretation of love, and the child was wrong, not maliciously wrong, just wrong in the way that children are wrong before they have the full picture. And I had been living by that wrong interpretation for 30-some years. I had to grieve it. I want to say that plainly because I think it's the part that doesn't get said often enough in conversations about growth and transformation. Before you can build something real, you have to grieve the thing you built that wasn't. You have to sit with the loss of the identity you curated, the story you told about yourself, the particular version of strength that was actually a form of hiding. Grief is not weakness. Grief is the appropriate response to loss. And I had lost things, not material things, but years of potential intimacy I had avoided, years of actual presence I had substituted with productivity, years of being known that I had exchanged for being impressive. That's a real loss, and pretending it wasn't, rushing past it in the direction of the improved future self, would have been just another form of the same avoidance that created the problem in the first place, so I sat with it. I let it be what it was. I didn't perform my way through the grief. I just went through it, slowly, with all the difficulty and regression and nonlinearity that going through something actually entails. Look at me for a second. You're in the middle of something. I don't know exactly what it is. The specifics are yours. But you're in the middle of something, and you've been in the middle of it for long enough that you've started to think the middle is permanent, that this particular difficulty, this particular weight, this particular version of not yet having arrived at the thing you're working toward, you've started to think it's just what life is, it's not permanent. But the way through it is not what you've been told. The way through it is not more productivity, more optimization, more performance, more building. The way through it is inward. The way through it requires you to do the one thing your entire life has been structured to avoid, to stop, and to sit in the discomfort of your own interior, and to listen to what you actually find there, without immediately trying to fix or improve or explain it away. The way through it is presence, starting with yourself. Here's what I learned about asking for help. The specific fear I had around it was not the fear of being burdensome, although I told myself it was that, because that sounds selfless. The real fear was transactional. I believed in the deep architecture of my conditioning that asking for help created debt. That debt was weakness. That weakness invited dismissal. And dismissal confirmed the darkest thing I believed about myself, that I was not fundamentally someone worth staying for. So I never asked, I managed, I handled, I absorbed. I processed alone in the dark and emerged with solutions and presented the solutions as though they had been effortless, because effort, visible effort, effortful effort, effort that required something of you that was too close to need. Learning to ask was one of the most difficult and most liberating things I have ever done. And I'll tell you what I discovered. The people who love you are waiting for you to ask. Not because they want to be needed, although some of them might, but because asking says something to them that all your managed competence never did. Asking says, I trust you with my insufficiency. I trust that your love for me doesn't depend on my having it together. I trust that you'll still be here when you see me without the armor. And that trust that extension of it, that risk of it, is its own form of intimacy. Maybe the deepest form. She said yes on a Thursday. I remember because Thursday has always felt like the most honest day of the week. Not the beginning with its aspirations, not the weekend with its relief, just Thursday, the day that is what it is. Without pretense in either direction, she said yes, and I felt the ground shift, not metaphorically, physically. The specific sensation of something solid becoming real, of something I had wanted and feared in equal measure finally materializing, and in the weeks after, in the daily accumulation of a life genuinely shared rather than curated and presented, I discovered what I had actually been building toward all along. Not the career, not the apartment, not the morning routine or the income streams or the body or the metric. A life that was inhabited rather than performed. A love that was unconditional, in the specific sense that the conditions I had been meeting all my life were no longer the price of admission. A home, the foundation is different now. It's not finished. I don't think foundations are ever finished, not when you're building on them continuously, not when the structure above keeps changing with the seasons of a shared life. But the material is different. The old foundation was poured from performance and approval and the particular cement of a child's incomplete understanding of love. It was strong in places, genuinely strong, but it had fault lines running through it from the beginning, invisible until the pressure was right. The new foundation is poured from something slower, honesty, presence, the daily choice to be actually here rather than strategically elsewhere, the practice of being known incrementally in the ordinary moments, dinner conversations, difficult silences, the small disclosures that don't seem significant but collectively constitute the act of being a person to another person rather than a presentation. It's less dramatic. I want to be honest about that. It doesn't have the adrenaline of achievement. It doesn't have the rush of the next milestone reached. It has something more sustaining and less exciting. The deep, quiet satisfaction of a life that is real. Don't deny it. Don't scroll past it. Don't metabolize this into motivation fuel for the next thing you're building without first sitting with what I'm actually saying, because I'm not telling you to stop building. I'm not making a case against ambition or achievement or the specific joy of creating something from nothing through effort and will. I'm asking you to ask yourself why. Why are you building? What are you building toward? What is the life you're constructing in service of? What does the finished version look like from the inside, not from the outside, not from the perspective of someone driving past the empire being impressed? From the inside, on a Tuesday evening, sitting in the silence, is it a home or is it an altar? I think about the man I was on that Tuesday, sitting on those floors I had earned the right to in that apartment with that refrigerator and that view. I don't have contempt for him. He was doing the best he knew how. He was running the programming he had been given, and he was running it well, and the results were real, and the effort was genuine, and none of that was wrong. He was just incomplete. He had built everything except the part that makes everything else mean something. He had mastered the external life and left the interior one largely unvisited, and the interior one, left alone that long, had gone quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when no one has been in them. Not peaceful, but hollow. Not calm, but empty. He needed to go inside. We all need to go inside. Here's what I want to leave you with. Not a conclusion. I don't think the most important things conclude. I want to leave you with a question and a challenge and an image. The question, what are you most afraid someone would find if they actually knew you? Sit in that. Don't answer quickly. The quick answer is the managed answer. The real answer is the one that comes up underneath the first answer, quieter and less flattering and more true. The challenge, tell one person something real this week, not catastrophic, not performative disclosure, something small and true that you would normally smooth over or manage or convert into something more presentable. Just one true thing, offered to one person who has earned the offering, see what happens. And the image, there is a version of your life that is not built for impression. It's smaller than the empire in some ways. It takes up less space on the outside. It doesn't translate into content as easily. It doesn't generate the same response in rooms full of people measuring each other, but it's warm. It has worn edges and familiar corners and a specific quality of light in the late afternoon that you know because you were actually present for it instead of scheduled somewhere impressive. It's a home, and you can build it, not instead of the other things, alongside them. Not by tearing down what you've built, by building inward with the same dedication you've given to building outward. She said yes, and everything changed. Not because she changed it, not because love solved anything or completed anything or made the hard things suddenly easy. Everything changed because her yes asked something of me that I had never been asked before. It asked me to show up as an actual person, not a performance of a person, not a curated version. The actual thing, frightened and capable and incomplete and trying and present, and I said yes back every day. That's the practice. That's the whole thing. The silence on that Tuesday was not failure. The emptiness was not the end. The collapse of the performance was not the destruction of the person. It was the beginning of the person. The first moment I could hear myself over everything I had built to avoid hearing myself. That's where I started. That's where you start. Not from your best version, not from your finished version, not from the version that has all the answers and all the credentials and all the infrastructure of a life successfully constructed. From here, from the honest, uncomfortable, entirely sufficient place of exactly who you are right now. That's the foundation. That's where a home begins. Build the home. Not for them. For you. For the version of you that is still waiting beneath all of it to be known.